What a hassle! This has nothing to do with me, right? Lena, who seemed to regard my husband and me as if we were something disgusting, replied in a rather irritated tone. Even though it's in law, the fact that a family member is ill must be nothing but a nuisance. I can't possibly provide care. After all, we are moving to our new home soon. My son's voice, who said this, was easily imagined to be wearing a somewhat unsettling smirk. He seemed to be watching the situation here, ready to end the call at any moment. So, good luck with the living caregiving. While I was at a loss for words due to his attitude, my son hung up the phone unilaterally. My husband and I were left behind in the hospital room. My husband was sleeping in bed. He had dementia. The recurring incontinence, forgetfulness, and the resulting marital quarrels. It was too much. The unavoidable hospitalization of my husband happened because I felt I was at my limit with the daily routine. I believe he would have wanted to stay home too. Out of a sense of guilt, I decided to provide living care, despite being unsure if it was necessary. I made a call to my son, and his wife was to report that. But to be spoken to so heartlessly, it was both frustrating and I couldn't say anything back. After having tests in the hospital, the cause of my husband's dementia was identified. It was decided to have surgery immediately to resolve it. The surgery was a success, and I was sure it would cure my husband's dementia. Contrary to such feelings, my husband, whose anesthesia should have worn off, won't wake up. I wonder what I'll do if this situation continues forever. My husband disliked being hospitalized, and I wonder if it was my fault for forcing him into it. As my husband remains unconscious, the day turns into night. The more I think, the tighter my chest gets, and tears overflow from my eyes. All of a sudden, someone takes my hand. In front of me, who had snapped back to reality, was my husband, smiling and looking at me. He had finally woken up. There were so many things I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come out. My husband gently stroked my hand while I was continuously weeping. "It's okay now, Mary." While I was at a loss, I heard the clear and firm words of my husband. "My name is Mary, 65 years old. I'm a housewife as you'd find anywhere. After graduating from high school, I got a job at 18 and worked for quite some time. Then, as time went by and I got used to my job, I fell in love at first sight with my husband, who had come to pitch a sales talk for new business. After what seemed to be a successful sales pitch, my husband started visiting the company many times. One day, when a business deal was finalized, my husband was so overjoyed that he forgot his business card holder and went home. At the request of my boss, I hurriedly chased after my husband to deliver the business card holder. Around the area where I left the company, I found my husband in a great pulse of joy. I nervously called out to him, and he was so surprised his eyes rounded. I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of him. I handed the stern husband his business card holder, and he repeatedly thanked me with delight. As I tried to return to the company telling him not to worry about it, my husband invited me for a meal. It turned out that my husband had been interested in me for some time. Despite both of us blushing at the truth, we made a promise to have a meal and parted ways. We started dating after several meals together. We would go out on dates every time we had a break and spend fun and happy times together. On my 24th birthday, my husband proposed to me. Of course, I accepted it, and we successfully met each other's families. A few years later, we were blessed with a child and led a calm and happy life. By witnessing my son's independence and marriage, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I noticed a certain change in my husband when I thought we could finally live a peaceful life as a married couple. My husband stopped going fishing, which he loved. He used to talk about when we would go fishing next time while tending to his fishing rod whenever he had free time. But recently, he not only stopped talking about fishing, but seemed to be absent-minded, unable to focus on anything. "Are you worried about something?" But there was no response to my question. He was just staring blankly at nothing. At first, I thought maybe it was because he had suddenly run out of things to do after retirement. But my speculation was wrong. One day, I felt something strange about my husband's work. He was clearly taking narrower steps and shuffling his feet. On top of that, when he tried to turn a corner in the hallway, he would often stagger and almost fall. He had never been like this before. What happened? "Hey, honey, let's get you checked out at the hospital next time." "I'm just sleep deprived. It's fine." Despite what he said, it didn't seem like my husband was staying up late. And then a decisive incident occurred. When I finished hanging out the laundry and entered the front door, there was an odd smell. Puzzled, I headed toward the living room and saw a wet hallway extending from my husband's room to the living room. That's right. The cause of the strange smell was my husband's incontinence. I secretly observed my husband, who was sitting on the sofa as usual in the living room. "Honey, could you stand up for a moment?" My husband's pants, as I suspected, were wet. I thought this wasn't normal and tried to head to the hospital right away. But my husband stubbornly refused. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't prevail over a man. I couldn't do it with my strength. Thinking that there was nothing I could do, I decided to call my son. "What? Did Dad wet himself? If it's a medical issue, you should call an ambulance right away." "Not me. I can't deal with this kind of hassle." After my son told me that, I reluctantly decided to call an ambulance. In the meantime, before the ambulance arrived, I had my husband change his clothes and clean up the hallway. Why did this happen to my husband? Then my husband was transported to the hospital by the ambulance. Until the moment he was put in the ambulance, my husband was desperately resisting. Insisting that there was nothing wrong with him, he refused to get in the ambulance. Still, thanks to the ambulance crew, who somehow managed to calm him down, he was finally transported. Even after arriving at the hospital, my husband, who was still restless, was given a sedative and now lies in bed. He underwent multiple tests immediately after being brought in by ambulance. He must be tired from all of that. While waiting for the test results, it was decided that he would be admitted today. Because of this, I have traveled back and forth between home and hospital several times to prepare for his hospital stay. After successfully completing the admission procedure, I held my husband's hand as we waited for the test results. My husband continues to stare blankly at the ceiling. Looking back, my husband had been misplacing his wallet and keys recently and coming home from shopping without anything, which had happened multiple times. He had never done such a thing before. Could he possibly have dementia? Come to think of it, he stopped calling my name recently. Perhaps he doesn't recognize me anymore. These thoughts swirled in my head, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my cheeks. He may never call my name again. At some point, I found myself squeezing my husband's hand as he continued to gaze blankly at the ceiling. Just then, I heard a knock at the hospital room door. I wiped away my tears hurriedly while responding. The doctor and nurse entered with serious faces. What could this be about? "We have something important to discuss. Could you please call a family member?" When I heard those words, everything in front of me went pitch black. The doctor and nurse said, "Please call us when a family member is present," and left the hospital room. But even with their words, I barely managed to respond. And when I was finally able to move, I called my son again. "What? Being called as a family member means Dad is in serious trouble, huh? Stop complaining. Just come here right now." "Huh? Such a pain. Don't contact me unless it's absolutely necessary. Bye." Unable to respond to my son's harsh words, I was helpless when he abruptly hung up the phone, and I found myself crouching down on the spot. After some time, a nurse who was worried about my absence came to check on me. I managed to explain that no other family members were coming, and she quickly went to call the attending physician. When he returned, he gave a detailed explanation of my husband's condition. It seems there may be something wrong with my husband's brain, and they will proceed with detailed examinations tomorrow. They promised to determine the cause and work towards recovery. There were other things they told me, but my mind was still trying to process the events of the day, and I was mostly in a daze. Seeing my exhausted state, the attending physician told me they would prepare a bed for me to rest. The nurses immediately prepared the bed for me, and before leaving the room, they told me to call out if I needed anything. I sat down on the prepared bed and looked at my husband. He was still staring blankly at the ceiling just like before. As I looked at him, I made up my mind. I'd become a living caregiver. Afterward, despite my reluctance to hear my son's voice, since they said there could be something wrong with my husband's brain, I had no choice but to call him. And when I told him that my husband might have to be hospitalized for a long time, and that I decided to become a living caregiver after his discharge, "You don't have to pretend to be a living caregiver. You're probably happy to get rid of the burden, right?" Unable to tolerate my son's laughing and vulgar attitude, I hung up the phone unliterally this time. In the weeks that followed, I spent most of my time in the hospital, and the date for my husband's surgery was set. As expected, something was found in my husband's brain, and it seems that it will be a major surgery. The thought of brain surgery alone makes me shudder. I thought I had listened carefully to the explanation about the surgery, but my mind seemed too full to remember it right away. I don't even know if the surgery will be successful. But what can you do if I don't believe? It was unusual for my son to call me when my husband's surgery was approaching next week. I answered the phone wondering what he would say this time, and my son's voice was very happy. "How's Dad's condition?" "Well, I know he can't be good." "Anyway, we've decided to move to a new house in a couple of weeks." "A new house? Moving? Where would they get the money for that?" As these thoughts raced through my mind, he kept talking. "So, you should bring us a housewarming gift once we've moved in. Dad needs to stay alive till then, so you'll have to work hard at your living caregiving. Haha, that's all. See you." His cruel words left me speechless. I was on the verge of smashing the phone on the floor. And then came the day of the surgery. My husband was still blankly staring at the ceiling. Occasionally, he would come back to reality and talk to me, only to drift away again. Clinging to hope, I fervently prayed for the success of his surgery. And finally, the time came for him to go to the surgery room. Right until the entrance of the surgery room, I stayed close to him, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement. I wasn't sure if my words were reaching him in his dazed state, but I couldn't just do nothing. Then a nurse told me, "You can only come this far. and I stopped. I couldn't take my eyes off my husband. I thought we made eye contact for a moment, but it might have been just my imagination. The nurse instructed me to wait in the room during the surgery. Reluctantly, I returned to the room, and time passed. Before I knew it, the room was dark, and looking outside, it was already night. The nurse approached me when I came to my senses and turned on the light. As I listened with bated breath, she told me that my husband's surgery was successful. As the tension left my body, my husband was brought back to the room after the surgery. He was still sleeping with an oxygen mask on, but I could clearly see him breathing. Seeing this, I held his hand with relief. His hand was cold from the surgery, but I could definitely feel his warmth. All that was left was for my husband to wake up. The nurse said, "Please, let us know when he wakes up," and left the room. Thinking my husband would return to his old self, I was so happy that I couldn't stop my tears. I decided to stay awake until my husband would wake up. But dawn broke, and it was afternoon the next day. Yet my husband still hadn't awakened. The attending physician and nurses came to check on him several times, but there was no sign of him waking up. As my husband slept, I was thinking back to the time when I first felt something was off with him. Perhaps I am the one to blame. I criticized my sick husband, became irritated by his forgetfulness and apparent lack of concern, and even shown my disgust when he stubbornly refuses to go to the hospital. As I consider the possibility that he may never wake up, I've been reflecting on many things. I regretted my harsh behavior towards him, and my chest tightens with guilt. All I can do is cry. Suddenly, I feel something warm touching my cheek. Surprised, I look up and there he is, my husband, smiling at me. I was so overwhelmed, but he gently reassures me. "It's okay now, Mary." Hearing him call my name after such a long time, I couldn't help but cry out loud without considering the place. The nurse who rushed in tried to calm me down. Now it was my turn to be absent-minded. The doctor who was in charge arrived, and he checked my husband's condition. There seemed to be no problem at the moment, but because he had brain surgery, he would need to stay in the hospital for a while for doctors to observe his progress. Seeing him answer questions so accurately, I finally felt relieved. As the doctor and the nurse left the room, my husband had a terrifying look on his face that I'd never seen before. I thought he had every right to be angry at me because of all the terrible things I've done to him. But instead, he said, "I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused, but I remember everything our son did to me. I didn't understand it before the surgery, but looking back, everything that happened was actually happening to you, Mary. I truly regret it." Even after he said this, I couldn't understand what he was talking about. A little later, I finally understood that he remembered all the interactions between me and our son that happened in front of him. And he asked me to tell him all the things that happened between me and our son that he didn't know about yet. I felt reluctant to tell on our son, but I was so overwhelmed by my husband's unusual intensity that I decided to tell him everything. After hearing my story, my husband's face turned red with anger. I told him to calm down because he just had surgery, and finally, he managed to suppress his anger and let out a sigh. "Mary, where did we go wrong in raising our son? But I can't stand it anymore. We have to punish him." "Punish him?" Seeing me tilting my head at the unexpected developments, my husband, with a troubled smile, asked me something. Upon hearing his words, I immediately went home. His condition continued to improve, and he was able to be discharged, and for the first time in a long time, we were able to return home. I hadn't been able to tidy up the house because we had been so busy with his hospitalization, but he said it was okay. I finished cleaning up the room quickly, and I immediately contacted our son. I called him over under the pretext of discussing living care, but I did not tell him that my husband had been discharged. See, I told you it was impossible, didn't I? But sis, I've come all this way. I suppose the dutiful son will listen to what you have to say. A few hours later, my son, together with his wife, arrived and sat down heavily on the living room sofa, looking quite pleased with himself. Then his wife, Lena, also sat down next to him, looking down at me with a condescending expression. I served tea quietly, pretending not to notice their attitude. So, what's this consultation all about? First of all, congratulations on moving to your new home. It must have been hard work. Oh, thanks. And I'm expecting a housewarming gift, by the way. I think we've given you enough already. Huh? At the unexpected words that flew out of my mouth, the couple exchanged glances, making puzzled face. We haven't received anything. What do you mean, enough? In response to Lena, who countered my statement, I looked straight into her eyes and continued. I know you've taken money from our bank account. At these words, the couple clearly showed signs of distress and started arguing in low voices. Don't make accusations without proof. As my son said this while grimacing, I calmly responded, just about the amount that you don't need to go to the counter was withdrawn. Why do you suspect us? It must have been a thief. If it really was a thief, I wonder why they would bother to return the bank book. They wouldn't even know the pen, would they? About that? Facing the couple, who were at a loss for words, I dropped the final bomb. And the bank book? It was in a different place than usual. That's a lie. I made sure to put it back in its original place. For a moment, no one spoke a word. My son's face remained frozen with his mouth wide open. Lena, who had risen in a fit of anger, also froze, breaking out in a cold sweat. There was silence for a while. Suddenly, Lena sank down on the sofa as if a string had been cut and looked down. You set a trap for us, didn't you? If you hadn't done anything, you wouldn't have been caught, would you? It's weird to play such a game with your own son. Perhaps thinking that the only way out of this situation was to make a scene, my son suddenly started shouting, I won't let things go his way. After all, this couple, my son and his wife, had taken the money that my husband had saved up little by little and used it for their new house and moving expenses. I just couldn't forgive them for trying to run away after doing something like that. You insulted my precious wife. First of all, apologize to Lena. What on earth is he saying? The couple should be the ones apologizing. I glared back at my son without backing down. What's with that look? Even if you glare at me like that, I'm not scared at all. Isn't it you two who should be apologizing, not me? Apologize to who? To Dad? But what did we do wrong? We just made effective use of money that wouldn't have been used anyway. Is there any need to apologize for that? The living room door was flung open with force just as my son was making his defiant statement. Seeing my husband, who suddenly appeared, the couple was lost for words. In front of the couple, whose mouths had dropped open, my husband sat down next to me with a stern look on his face. When he slammed the bank book, which is now empty of balance, on the table in front of him, the couple were surprised and shivered. Congratulations to both of you. You've moved to a new house, right? It must have cost a lot of money. How did you raise the funds? Did you win with their gambling skills? Where did that bravado from earlier go? Our son is silently listening to his husband's words. Don't tell me you thought I wouldn't know anything, because I was suffering from dementia during that time. Did you feel nothing seeing your mother crying and talking to you on the phone? But there's no way dementia can be cured instantly, right? Even if surgery was done, you probably forget about the current situation in no time. Our son, trying to wriggle out of the situation by arguing loudly, was not making any sense because he was upset. Exactly. There's no way it could be cured so quickly. That's why I thought we'd be fine. If we could just trick you, my mother-in-law. Sorry, but that's not going to happen. Your father was suffering from a type of dementia that is curable. It's called idiopathic normal pressure hydrocephalus, and since the surgery was successful, your father won't forget anything anymore. When I said that, the air in the room froze. There was a long silence, but my husband quietly opened his mouth. You broke into our house and took out the bank book without permission. Even if you are our son, this is a crime. And on top of that, you kept withdrawing small amounts to avoid getting caught. What on earth have you done? But it's your fault for not locking the door, Mom. That's true. Since my husband was hospitalized and it was decided that he would have brain surgery, I panicked. During the days when I would hurriedly return home to take a bath and do laundry, and then go back to the hospital, there seems to have been times when I left without locking the door. When I told my husband everything after the surgery, it seems he also had doubts about our son moving to a new house, just like I did. It's no wonder he had doubts. Despite being big gamblers and not really working, my son and his wife always had money for gambling. My husband had been adamant about refusing, but it seems our son had been begging for money from my husband without me knowing. With all these things combined, it seemed like our son and his wife saw my forgetting to lock the door as an opportunity. But it wasn't me. In reality, it was all Lena who did it. I was wondering why she's been doing quite well financially lately. Stop making false accusations. You were the one who gave all the instructions. Besides, there's no way I would know your family's PIN. With that said, our son had no choice but to remain silent. Even if he's a family member, withdrawing money without permission is a crime. Moreover, the couple didn't just use the money for a new house and moving expenses, but they seemed to have bought new furniture and appliances as well. But that alone wouldn't empty my husband's savings, so they must have poured the rest into gambling. What on earth have they done? My husband had attached a sticky note with the pen written on the last page of the bank book, but it didn't have any numbers written on it. It only said, wedding anniversary. Only our son would understand. Read what's written here carefully, and if you agree, sign and seal it. Of course, this applies to Lena too. If you refuse, I will immediately report this to the police. Saying so, my husband presented a piece of paper to our son and his wife. Written on it were conditions. Our son would work at the construction company run by my husband's friend. Lena would find proper employment. They would repay all the money they withdraw without permission, and they would never gamble again. Reading this, my son, though looking frustrated, silently sighed and sealed the document. Lena, too, reluctantly sighed and sealed the document while being glared at by my husband. Then the couple left. Since then, they seem to have divorced. It seems that their relationship was ruined as they blamed each other for their problems. Although it's good that they divorced, neither of them has money to move out. so they seem to be living together under the same roof in domestic separation. Additionally, it seems my son already had debts from consumer credit, and now he's working desperately at a temp job to repay debts in 2 places. On the other hand, Lena, who thought she would enjoy living in her new home, seems to have been complaining to her friends that this time was a disaster. However, since the rumor spread quickly, it seems she can't go out in public anymore. And like my son, she's working multiple jobs, primarily night shifts, to repay the debt she created herself. I didn't know this, but apparently my husband had another bank book, and he was able to pay for the surgery and hospitalization from there. Now, we decided to use that savings as a bridge until the couple repays the money. About the other bank book, my husband said, "This money was saved for traveling with Mary after retirement, but there's still time ahead, so let's take it easy for now." There were times when I prepared myself for the possibility that my husband might not wake up after the surgery from the hospital. But now that we are able to spend such happy times, I'm really glad he's here. May these days continue forever.